down his life for his sheep. Now, he didn't say the good shepherd acts like he lays down his life for his sheep. The good shepherd goes through the motions but doesn't really do it. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep, and I am the good shepherd. 3 times in about 10 verses he says, I lay down my life. And he adds, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. You see, he does not lay his life down merely to lay it down. He does not die merely to die. He dies in order to be resurrected bodily. Jesus talks in John 12 of the seed falling into the ground. And as it falls into the ground and dies, it brings forth much fruit. If you put that in its context, again, he is talking about being lifted up. And if we have difficulty with all of these rather ambiguous kinds of figurative statements, then we have a great abundance of other statements like, and he, Jesus, then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Now, this may well be why they were terrified and thought they saw a spirit. They had no anticipation that Jesus would rise from the dead. They could not entertain the idea, and yet Jesus spoke to them very plainly and clearly about it on a number of occasions. In the next chapter of Mark, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise. But they did not understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it. That's Mark 9. Mark 10. Again, Jesus is with his disciples, and he says the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death, and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him, spit upon him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. Now, in case people want to quibble and say, well, Jesus speaks in these verses about the Son of Man. And in case some one of you wants to say, well, now, the expression Son of Man merely means a human being, as in the book of Ezekiel. Let me assure you that the expression Son of Man, like spiritual, has a variety of meanings. Not just one or even two. And fairness says that one understand and grapple with the full range of variety of meanings. On one occasion, Jesus says, no one ascends into heaven, but he who descended out of heaven, even the Son of Man. The Son of Man, whoever he is not just a human being. The Son of Man is someone who descended from heaven. That's hardly a man having sex with a woman and she conceives and a child is born. There's something divine going on there. And in John chapter 9, beginning in verse 35, to make it very plain, Jesus speaks to a man who was blind, to whom he had given sight again. And he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man said to him, who is he that I may believe in him? And Jesus said, he it is that speaks with you. And who was speaking with him? Jesus. So let's not go chasing rabbits and somehow try to set aside the clear statements that Jesus makes where he says the Son of Man will be killed by somehow saying, well, the Son of Man, we don't know who that is. In the Gospels, Jesus uses it as one of the titles for himself. But more than that, in Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, Jesus says, that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give His life as a ransom for many. Now you may want to say, well, you can give your life in diligent service. It doesn't necessarily mean give your life in death. But you go a bit farther and find Jesus as He talks about the beginning of the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, the communion, whatever you wish to call it. He takes the cup and He said, "This cup is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the remission of sins." Jesus intended to give His life a ransom for many by pouring out His blood. Mr. Deedat talks about the garden and the business of buying swords and placing 8 men at the gate of the garden to guard it. I submit to you that's an assumption. Where does it say He placed them there to guard it? The text does not say that. Someone is reading into the text an idea which they find somehow helpful, trying to assert that no, Jesus had no intention of dying. He had an intention of fighting, of continuing on, and of living. And so we're back finally then from the allegories and the figures of the Old Testament, from the figurative language of Jesus to the plain statements of Jesus that I will be delivered up, I will be crucified, I will be killed, I will rise from the dead on the third day, to the record of that event taking place in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now either that is true or it's not. I agree. It's either crucifixion or it's F-I-C-T-I-O-N. But if it is F-I-C-T-I-O-N, then I would submit to you that somehow God has failed. And Mr. Deedat undoubtedly will want to come back and say, well, look at your scriptures. Look at the many different variations. Look at the many different manuscripts. Look at the many different editions, the many different translations. I hope none of you get caught up in that. There are multitudes of translations of the Quran. I could bring the Quran in English by Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall and the Quran by Yusuf Ali in English and point you to certain passages that say different things. But what does that prove? That proves nothing. That proves that the person who translated the Arabic into the English, or the persons who did that, disagreed among themselves as to the proper English words to convey the Arabic. And so for someone to come along and say, aha, here is a version, here is a translation, here is the Revised Standard, here is the King James, and look at the differences. Really, if that proves anything about the Bible, it proves the same thing I would submit to you about the Quran. And so the word of the New Testament is that Jesus died, that Jesus arose from the dead, and that He lives. Such is the message of the apostles found all through the New Testament, affirmed by each and every one of them. Rushing very quickly on, such is the information that comes out of historical sources. The cross, as a symbol, dates back in history almost to the time of Jesus, found among the earliest Christian communities of which we had any record. Baptism, a Christian act, an ordinance, a sacrament, Christians call it different things, but all agree that it somehow is associated with the death and the burial and the resurrection of Christ, as ancient as Christianity. The Lord's Supper, the communion, the Eucharist, whatever one chooses to call it, likewise bearing the symbolism of the Christ who died in His body of flesh, gave His blood, and was raised to life again. The testimony of ancients. Oh, you can say, yes, they did not live in the exact days of the disciples. But you find a man like Justin Martyr in his Defense of Christianity, written about AD 150, urging the emperor to check the details of the death of Christ recorded in a document called the Acts of the Roman Governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. You find Tacitus writing in his Roman Annals, early in the 1st century, discussing the origins of Christianity and speaking of Christ, who was executed by the sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate in the reign of Tiberius. You find a man named Thalius writing in about 52 AD, quoted by a Christian named Julius Africanus, talking about the crucifixion of Christ. You find in a Syriac manuscript dated from 73 AD in the British Museum the question raised, what did the Jews gain by executing their wise king? You find rabbinic traditions in the Talmud, tractates of the Sanhedrin, saying Jesus was hanged on Passover Eve. What does all of this mean? Well, now, one possible explanation is that either these things happened or these people were deceived. Again, looking at some Muslim interpreters of the Quran, they did not kill him, they did not crucify him, it only seemed that they did so. The interpretation of that particular passage often carries the idea that in fact the Romans and the Jews were deceived. That they thought they crucified Jesus, but in fact they did not. They crucified someone else. Well, who deceived them? Were they just ignorant? Just foolish? Or was it something of a movement of God to protect His prophet? If it was God acting to protect His prophet, what kind of a God is that? To foist such a hoax on so much of the world? And were the disciples deceived? And if they were deceived, by whom were they deceived? Sheer ignorance? Or by God? Who wasn't deceived when it came to this matter of the crucifixion and the death of Jesus? It seems like everybody was. And if everybody was, then once again, what happens to God, who is concerned to reveal His message for humankind in and through a prophet like Jesus, who thus is defeated from the very outset because the Romans and the Jews are deceived, and the Christians must have been also. Either they were deceived or they were dishonest. They knew better, but they deliberately and willfully and maliciously wrote that He died when He hadn't. Why send the Injil to Jesus only to almost immediately fail? Which must be what happened if the disciples likewise were deceived. Why the crucifixion? Why the resurrection? Well, it's more than salvation through the blood of Christ, but it is that. Mr. Deedat at the very outset pointed to a difference between Christianity and Islam in terms of the concepts of sin. Original sin, he referred to, an idea that has a half a dozen different interpretations in Christian circles. Christians are not agreed about the meaning of all of the implications of original sin. But Christians are agreed in their understanding that what the Bible is saying, the Holy Book is saying, is that human beings are sinful, and that sinfulness involves more than simply a mistake. that there is something fundamentally wrong with humankind as the consequence of the choice that people made in rebellion against God that brought a serious consequence with it, so that people are bent out of shape. The evidence? I think Scripture and human experience. I mean, how many of you, if you would be honest, in the depths of your heart, in the quiet of your night when you're alone, can actually deal with and overcome those tendencies within you toward self-centeredness, toward pride, toward lust, and on the list would go. And I think in a moment of honesty, most all of us would admit, no. We are not able through our own energies nor through ritual to overcome those things. Why? Because of the doctrine set forth in the Holy Book regarding the nature of sin. Why the crucifixion? Well, let me put it in this kind of context. The crucifixion, in some ways, is a question of honor. A question of the honor of God. Now, the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament says that if a man sleeps with his mother, he brings dishonor on his father, and he should be put to death. If a man sleeps with his sister, he brings dishonor on his family, and he should be put to death. And on the provisions of the code of law go, raising the question of honor. You know about honor. You know about honor. Dishonor cuts one off. And so in the book of 1 Samuel in the Old Testament, we are told that Eli's sons have brought dishonor on their father, and they will be cut off. And within one chapter they are dead and gone. We read of Belshazzar, a heathen king, in the book of Daniel. And God says to him, because you have dishonored God, your days will be terminated. Your kingdom is over. You see, not only is it possible for us to dishonor our families, but it is possible for us to dishonor God. And so God, in several places in the Old Testament, says, you have dishonored me. You have brought shame on me. And in the New Testament, Jesus, quoting from the prophet Isaiah, speaking of the Jewish people of his day, says, these people honor me with their lips only, but their heart is far from me. You see, it is possible to honor God with one's lips, and yet at the same time dishonor God. How does one deal with dishonor when it comes to pass? May I suggest to you, it's not through ritual. You who are Muslims, think of your home countries. Think of the views that many people in your societies have. A daughter, a sister, slips out of the house unaccompanied and meets a young man on the street corner. And they talk, or walk, or hold hands, or touch, or have sex. A disgrace. And so the girl comes home having been discovered, and she says, "Father, brother, family, I'm sorry." And they say, "That's all right. Forget it." You know better than that. You know that you do not remove dishonor brought on the family of a serious nature by someone merely saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," and someone else saying, "Forget it." What about the honor of God? When the honor of God has been offended, when you and I have brought shame on the very God who made us, what is to be done? Do you mean that we stand and say, God, I'm sorry? Or that we perform some sort of external ritual? Or that we even come with our heart and say, with all of my heart, I'm sorry, and I perform this ritual? No. God intervenes at that point, and here is the miracle of miracles. Jesus said in John 15, greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. And I now call you my friends. And so God sends Jesus as the one who will step in between, who will deal with the issue of the dishonor that we have brought on God, by making amends, by dying for us. As many a man or woman has died because they have dishonored their father or their brother or their sister. And the Quran talks about Abraham redeeming his son through a noble sacrifice. This is what God has done. He has redeemed us from the penalty due because we dishonor Him by a noble sacrifice. That sacrifice being Jesus, the one who steps between, the one who becomes the protector, the one who is the mediator or the intercessor, the one who takes the blow if there is a blow to be taken. And indeed, in issues of honor, there is always a blow to be taken. And so in John chapter 5, Jesus says, moreover, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent Him. I submit to you tonight that the crucifixion and the resurrection must be a reality. Otherwise, you and I are left with no hope, for we have offended the honor of God, and it is not so lightly set aside. Well, is all of this reasonable? That one would die for others? Reasonable? Yes. Above reason? Also, in some ways, yes. But it nonetheless is the act and the movement of God. A demonstration of God's love, a demonstration of God's mercy, a demonstration of God's justice, a forgiveness grounded in the very nature of God, demonstrating the very nature of God. I would submit to you tonight that any sort of hope for eternal life based on each one of us being good enough or performing the ritual well enough is a very, very shaky kind of hope. God is set forth in the Bible, and I think also set forth in Islam, is a God of justice, a God who avenges, and also a God who is merciful and a God who is compassionate. Now, I suggest to you that it's very difficult to somehow harmonize those ideas. How can you be just and avenging of your honor and of the insult done to you and at the same time be merciful and compassionate? By simply waving away the offense? That may be mercy and compassion, but where is justice? Where is the avenging nature? Do you discount it? Do you ignore it? Do you deny it? Does it cease to be? On the other hand, to bring the judgment, to exercise the justice, to avenge what